The quickest way to learn who really owns something is to watch who panics when the truth shows up. The first sound that caught my attention was not laughter. It was the steady splash of pool water echoing across my backyard before I had even turned off my truck. I remember sitting in the driveway for a second, listening to children laughing, music drifting through the warm afternoon air, and the unmistakable sound of someone diving into water that should have been completely empty. I had left for work before sunrise that morning, and nobody had permission to be at my house. At first, I honestly thought one of my neighbors might have wandered through the wrong fence while watching their grandchildren. Then I stepped around the corner of my garage, and every explanation I had imagined disappeared. More than a dozen complete strangers were relaxing around my private swimming pool as though they had reserved the place weeks in advance. Bright towels covered my lounge chairs. Colorful inflatable floats drifted across the water. Someone had placed a cooler beneath the cedar pergola I spent an entire summer building after buying the property. A portable speaker quietly played country music while families smiled beneath oversized umbrellas, completely unaware that they were standing inside a private backyard. Nobody looked nervous. Nobody acted like they were trespassing. They looked comfortable because every person there believed someone with authority had invited them. The smell of sunscreen mixed with fresh-cut grass, chlorine, charcoal drifting from a nearby grill, and blooming jasmine climbing the cedar privacy fence that surrounded every inch of the yard. It looked less like my home and more like a boutique vacation resort. Then I noticed Linda Harrison standing outside the electronic gate wearing a crisp white blazer, designer sunglasses, and the confident smile of someone proud of a successful plan. She carried a thick homeowners association folder under one arm while greeting another family arriving with beach bags, folding chairs, and excited children. She pointed toward my backyard exactly like a resort manager welcoming weekend guests. Watching that scene felt almost more unbelievable than seeing strangers inside my property. I walked toward the entrance slowly, careful not to alarm the families already enjoying themselves. One little girl waved at me before jumping back into the shallow end while her parents smiled politely, assuming I must have been another neighborhood resident enjoying what they believed was a shared amenity. That single smile told me they had absolutely no idea anything was wrong. Linda finally noticed me approaching and lifted her hand with complete confidence. "Perfect timing," she said cheerfully. "The vacation renters are loving the pool. This has been such a wonderful addition to the neighborhood experience." I looked past her toward the water shimmering beneath the bright July sun before quietly asking a simple question. "My pool," she answered without hesitation. "The association approved access for guests staying in our vacation homes. Everyone benefits when we make the community more attractive." I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. Instead, I looked toward the wrought iron gate separating the patio from the sidewalk. Mounted beside it was the electronic keypad I had personally installed 3 years earlier after finishing the backyard renovation. I knew every wire inside that control panel because I had programmed the system myself. There had never been a property manager account. There had never been an association administrator profile. There had only ever been one permanent administrator code, and I was the only person who had ever known it. Linda continued smiling because she believed she had already solved every obstacle before I arrived home. What she did not realize was that the most important part of the entire property was never the swimming pool itself. It was the gate, and the truth hidden behind that keypad was about to change everything. My name is Ethan Brooks, and that backyard had never been just another piece of real estate to me. Every square foot represented years of careful planning, long weekends, and more than a few late nights after work. I was 42 years old, a systems engineer by profession, and I approached homeownership the same way I approached every major project in my career. I believe preparation solved problems long before they ever became emergencies. 6 years earlier, when I purchased the house, the swimming pool already existed, but almost everything surrounding it needed attention. The old fence leaned slightly toward the alley, the gate barely latched, cracked concrete surrounded the pool deck, and the landscaping had been neglected for years. Instead of hiring someone to redesign everything, I spent nearly 2 summers rebuilding the backyard one project at a time. I installed the cedar privacy fence myself, poured new sections of concrete, planted flowering shrubs around the perimeter, added low-voltage landscape lighting, built the pergola overlooking the water, and finally replaced the outdated mechanical lock with a modern electronic access system. That gate became the final piece of the entire renovation because privacy mattered just as much as appearance. I researched different controllers for weeks before choosing one designed for residential security. The installation manual filled nearly 100 pages, but programming it became one of my favorite parts of the project. I intentionally created only one permanent administrator account because I never wanted confusion about who controlled access to my property. Whenever family visited for holidays or friends came over for weekend cookouts, I generated temporary guest codes that automatically expired after they left. Nobody else ever received administrator privileges because there had never been any reason to share them. Every setting, every software update, and every access log remained protected inside the controller and mirrored through the secure application on my phone. I also kept every document connected to the property inside a gray file case in my home office. The recorded deed, county survey, renovation permits, electrical inspections, equipment warranties, contractor invoices, and photographs documenting each improvement were organized chronologically inside labeled folders. Some people joked that I treated my backyard like an engineering project. They were probably right. Organization had always given me peace of mind. Looking through the electronic gate that afternoon, I realized the families enjoying the pool were not the people creating the problem. They smiled whenever our eyes met. Children laughed while tossing a beach ball through the shallow end, and parents thanked Linda for helping make their vacation more enjoyable. None of them acted entitled or disrespectful. They simply believed someone with legitimate authority had invited them. That realization changed everything for me. If they had been misled, then my frustration belonged somewhere else entirely. Linda, meanwhile, continued greeting arriving guests with complete confidence, occasionally pointing toward my backyard while describing it as though it belonged to the neighborhood instead of a private homeowner. Every confident sentence she spoke made me more curious than angry. Confidence without documentation rarely survives careful examination. I looked once more toward the keypad mounted beside the wrought iron gate, its small green display glowing quietly beneath the afternoon sun. Behind that simple panel rested years of planning, detailed programming, and one administrator account that had never belonged to anyone except me. Whatever story Linda believed she was telling the neighborhood, I already knew the gate itself had recorded the real one. I walked a few steps closer to the families gathered around the pool and smiled before speaking. I hope everyone is enjoying the afternoon. A father standing near the grill smiled back immediately. It is beautiful here. We were told this was one of the nicest amenities included with our rental. There was genuine appreciation in his voice, not entitlement. I nodded politely. May I ask who gave you that information? Without hesitation, he reached into a beach bag and unfolded a colorful welcome packet. Several other guests produced nearly identical brochures. Across the front appeared photographs of walking trails, a neighborhood playground, and, to my surprise, a professionally edited picture of my own swimming pool. The angle had been carefully chosen so that my house was completely hidden behind landscaping, making the pool appear to be a shared community facility instead of part of a private residence. A paragraph beneath the photographs described exclusive neighborhood features available to vacation renters, and my pool appeared near the top of the list. Every family standing in my backyard had trusted those printed pages. I slowly handed the brochure back and thanked them for showing it to me. Linda folded her arms and smiled confidently. Now you understand, she said. The association has been working hard to improve the neighborhood experience for visitors. I looked at her calmly. Did you ever verify who actually owns the property before including it in these materials? She answered almost immediately. The association manages what benefits the community. Once again, she avoided the question instead of answering it. I glanced toward the electronic keypad mounted beside the wrought iron gate. The small display glowed quietly in the afternoon sunlight exactly as it had every day since I installed it. While Linda continued speaking with another arriving family, I opened the secure administrator application on my phone. Within seconds, the system synchronized with the gate controller and displayed the complete access history. Every authorized entry appeared with a date, time, credential type, and expiration status. My administrator account remained the only permanent profile in the system. Temporary guest codes issued months earlier for family gatherings had expired automatically exactly as programmed. Maintenance access had not been used in weeks. Most importantly, there was no record of any authorized gate opening that afternoon. I studied the screen a second time just to eliminate the possibility of human error. The information did not change. If the gate had never been opened electronically, then everyone standing inside my backyard had entered another way. That realization shifted my attention away from the software and toward the gate itself. I slowly examined the hinges, the frame, the latch housing, and the electronic strike plate from several angles. Nothing appeared damaged. No screws had been removed. No wiring had been disturbed. Everything looked perfectly normal until I noticed a thin, transparent piece of plastic carefully wedged between the latch and the strike plate. It was almost invisible unless someone knew exactly where to look. The spacer prevented the latch from fully engaging whenever the gate closed, allowing anyone to pull it open without entering a code, while making it appear securely closed from the outside. I carefully removed the tiny piece and held it in my hand. It weighed almost nothing, yet it explained why the electronic records showed no authorized access at all. The gate had never been unlocked because it had never truly been locked. I slipped the spacer into my pocket without making a scene and looked once more toward Linda. She continued greeting new arrivals with complete confidence, unaware that the smallest object on the property had quietly become the strongest piece of evidence in the entire story. The tiny plastic spacer remained in my pocket as I walked back toward the patio, and the more I thought about it, the clearer the entire situation became. The family scattered around the pool had never bypassed my security system. They had simply walked through a gate that someone intentionally prevented from locking. That distinction mattered because it separated honest guests from the person who created the misunderstanding. I returned to the outdoor dining table beneath the cedar pergola and placed my phone beside the brochure one of the families had shown me earlier. The Secure Administrator application was still open, displaying the complete access history for the electronic gate. Every authorized entry, every temporary guest credential, every maintenance session, and every administrator action appeared exactly where it belonged. There was still only one permanent administrator account listed in the system, and it belonged to me. Linda walked toward the table with the same confident expression she had worn since I arrived home. "I hope we have cleared everything up," she said. The association simply wanted visitors to enjoy the neighborhood. I looked at the electronic log before meeting her eyes. Enjoying the neighborhood and entering private property are two very different things. She opened her folder and removed several printed homeowners association documents. "The board has broad authority to improve community amenities," she replied while placing the papers on the table. I read through them carefully. They described landscaping standards, architectural review procedures, seasonal decorating guidelines, parking regulations, and maintenance responsibilities for common areas. They were professionally prepared, but none of them identified my backyard as association property or granted authority over my swimming pool. I gently returned the papers to her. "These explain how the association manages community property," I said calmly. "Can you show me the document transferring ownership of this backyard?" She turned another page, then another, searching for language that was not there. Around us, several vacation renters had quietly stopped swimming and gathered nearby, curious about the conversation but remaining respectful. One father spoke up politely. "We honestly thought this was part of the neighborhood recreation area." The brochure made it seem official. I nodded. "I believe you completely." Then I walked into my house and returned carrying the gray document case that had remained organized inside my office since the day I purchased the property. I placed it beside the phone and carefully opened it. Inside were the recorded deed, the certified county survey, the original renovation permits, electrical inspection approvals, equipment warranties, and photographs documenting every stage of the backyard improvements. I laid the survey across the table first. Bright boundary lines clearly surrounded the pool, pergola, equipment room, and every section of the fenced yard. There was no overlap with association common property and no recorded easement granting public access. Next came the deed identifying me as the legal owner, followed by the permits showing every improvement had been completed with county approval. Finally, I turned my phone toward everyone standing nearby. The administrator dashboard remained unchanged. One permanent administrator account, 0 homeowners association accounts, 0 management company credentials. Every temporary guest code issued for family gatherings had expired months earlier. Then I quietly removed the thin, transparent spacer from my pocket and placed it beside the documents. The tiny piece of plastic immediately drew everyone's attention. The gate was never opened by the electronic system today, I explained. Someone prevented it from locking, which allowed people to enter without using any access code. Silence settled across the patio as every document, every digital record, and every physical detail began telling exactly the same story. The quiet that settled across the backyard lasted only a few seconds, but it felt much longer. Every pair of eyes moved between the survey spread across the patio table, the administrator screen glowing on my phone, and the tiny plastic spacer resting beside the documents. None of those items depended on opinions. They simply existed, each confirming the others with remarkable consistency. One of the fathers slowly folded the vacation brochure and looked at me with genuine concern. "We honestly believe this was included with our rental," he said. "If we had known this belonged to your home, we never would have stepped inside." I smiled because I had believed that from the very beginning. "I know," I replied. "You trusted the information you were given. That is not the same as intentionally entering someone else's property." His shoulders relaxed as several nearby families nodded quietly. Linda remained standing beside the table, still holding her homeowners association folder. But the confidence that had filled every conversation earlier that afternoon had begun to fade. She looked from the county survey to the electronic gate and then back to the administrator screen as though hoping something would contradict the evidence. Nothing did. At that moment, another vehicle pulled into my driveway. A professionally dressed representative from the vacation rental management company stepped out carrying a laptop bag and several printed reservation packets. One of the guests had contacted the office after realizing something was wrong, and the company had immediately sent someone to verify the situation in person. He introduced himself, politely apologized for the interruption, and asked whether he could review the documents already on the table. I invited him to do exactly that. He carefully examined the recorded deed first, then compared the county survey with the promotional brochure that listed my swimming pool as a neighborhood amenity. His expression became more serious with every page. Finally, I turned my phone toward him and showed the administrator dashboard together with the access history for the electronic gate. He quietly reviewed the information before asking one simple question. "Has the homeowners association ever received administrator access to this gate?" "No," I answered. "There has only ever been one permanent administrator account, and it has always belonged to me." He nodded thoughtfully before comparing the digital records with the physical condition of the gate. When I showed him the transparent plastic spacer that had prevented the latch from locking correctly, he examined it for a moment and placed it back on the table. "That explains why there are no authorized entries recorded today," he said. "The electronic system never failed. It was simply bypassed mechanically." The guests listened carefully as the explanation connected every piece of the puzzle. The representative then opened his laptop, signed into the company's property management system, and reviewed the listing associated with the neighborhood. Within minutes, he located the promotional description that advertised my private swimming pool as a shared amenity for vacation renters. He compared the listing with the county survey one final time before closing the computer with a quiet sigh. "These materials should never have been published in this form," he admitted. "Our company relied on information presented as official without independently verifying the ownership records. That was our mistake, and we are going to correct it immediately." Hearing those words, several families looked visibly relieved. They had finally received confirmation that they had been misinformed rather than irresponsible. As the late afternoon sunlight shimmered across the calm surface of the pool, every important fact had now been confirmed by property records, digital evidence, physical inspection, and the very company that had unknowingly helped spread the misunderstanding. The truth no longer depended on who spoke the loudest. It had become something everyone standing in my backyard could plainly see. The atmosphere around the pool changed completely once every important question had been answered with facts instead of assumptions. The vacation rental representative remained beside the patio table with his laptop open, carefully comparing the digital listing against the county survey and my recorded deed. After several quiet minutes, He looked up with a professional expression that left very little room for misunderstanding. Our legal compliance department has already reviewed the county parcel information, he explained. The public records match every document you have provided today. This swimming pool has always been part of your privately owned property. Hearing those words seemed to lift a weight from the families gathered nearby. One couple quietly apologized again before helping their children collect inflatable toys and neatly fold their towels. We truly believe this was included with our reservation, the father said. Thank you for treating us with respect instead of assuming the worst. I smiled because that had been my intention from the beginning. You trusted the information you received. That does not make you responsible for how it was created. The representative immediately began correcting the situation. Sitting beneath the pergola, he accessed the company's reservation system and removed every photograph showing my swimming pool from the online property listings. One by one, the descriptions advertising neighborhood amenities disappeared from the screen. He then prepared a notification that would be sent to every current guest staying in nearby vacation homes, explaining that the swimming pool was private property and unavailable for public use. He even scheduled an internal review requiring future property listings to be verified against official ownership records before publication. Standing only a few feet away, Linda watched quietly without interrupting. The confidence she had displayed earlier had been replaced by thoughtful silence. She looked at the county survey one more time before speaking in a noticeably calmer voice. I should have verified the ownership before making assumptions, she admitted. There was no dramatic confrontation and no raised voices. It was simply an acknowledgement that facts deserved to come before confidence. I appreciated that because solving the problem mattered far more than assigning blame. Before the families left, I walked over to the electronic gate and held up the small transparent spacer one final time. This tiny piece prevented the latch from locking correctly, I explained. The administrator system never failed. It recorded exactly what happened because no authorized code was ever used. Several guests nodded as the explanation finally connected every detail they had witnessed throughout the afternoon. I removed the spacer completely, entered my administrator code into the keypad, and waited for the familiar confirmation tone. The gate unlocked smoothly, then closed behind the departing families with the solid metallic click I had heard thousands of times before. This time the latch fully engaged exactly as designed. I opened the administrator application on my phone one last time and watched a new entry appear in the activity log, recording my authorized access with the correct date and time. The electronic system had quietly done its job all along. It had preserved an accurate history while opinions changed around it. As the last family waved goodbye from the sidewalk and the vacation rental representative packed away his laptop, the backyard slowly became peaceful again. The water reflected the late afternoon sunlight. The pergola cast long shadows across the stone patio, and the only sounds remaining were birds settling into nearby trees and the gentle movement of water against the pool wall. Looking around my backyard, I realized that preparation had accomplished exactly what anger never could. Careful records, patient conversations, and simple evidence had restored the truth without turning neighbors into enemies. 3 evenings later, the monthly homeowners association meeting drew a larger crowd than anyone expected. Usually only a handful of residents attended, but word about the misunderstanding had quietly spread throughout the neighborhood, and nearly every chair inside the clubhouse was occupied before the meeting officially began. I arrived carrying the same gray document case that had remained beside my desk for years, not because I expected another disagreement, but because experience had taught me that organized records often prevent new ones from starting. The vacation rental management representative was already there with a laptop connected to the projector, while several members of the Homeowners Association board reviewed printed agendas. Linda entered a few moments later carrying her familiar folder, although her confident stride had been replaced by a more thoughtful pace. When the meeting opened, the association attorney immediately displayed the official county parcel map on the large screen at the front of the room. Colored boundary lines clearly separated every private lot from every common area maintained by the association. My backyard, the swimming pool, the pergola, the equipment room, the electronic gate, and the surrounding fence all appeared entirely within my recorded property boundaries. There was no shared easement, no recreational designation, and no recorded document granting the association any authority over the property. The attorney calmly explained that community amenities could only be represented as such when supported by legally recorded ownership or documented access rights. Neither existed in this case. The vacation rental representative then demonstrated the updates already completed inside the reservation system. The previous promotional photographs showing my swimming pool had been permanently removed. Revised descriptions listed only legitimate neighborhood amenities, and a new internal verification policy required ownership confirmation before future marketing materials could be published. Several homeowners quietly thanked him for correcting the information so quickly. One longtime resident commented that the new verification process would likely prevent similar misunderstandings throughout the community for years to come. Linda stood when invited to address the room. She spoke calmly and without defensiveness, acknowledging that assumptions had been made without first confirming ownership through county records. She explained that future association decisions involving private property would require documented verification before any announcement, brochure, or recommendation could be distributed. No one interrupted her. The discussion remained respectful because every important question had already been answered by evidence instead of opinions. Before the meeting concluded, the board unanimously approved a formal procedure requiring property ownership verification for any future neighborhood publications. It was a surprisingly simple policy, yet everyone present understood how valuable it could become. After the meeting ended, several neighbors stopped to speak with me. They were not interested in discussing the disagreement anymore. Instead, they wanted advice about organizing their own property records, surveys, warranties, and improvement permits. I smiled because that outcome meant more to me than any apology ever could. As I walked outside beneath the warm evening sky, I realized the entire situation had quietly changed the neighborhood in a positive way. People now value documentation a little more than assumptions, and respectful conversations had begun replacing confident guesses. Sometimes the strongest improvements in a community are not new buildings or expensive projects. Sometimes they begin with something as simple as everyone agreeing to respect the difference between private ownership and shared responsibility. The neighborhood settled into a comfortable routine over the following weeks, but one quiet change became impossible to ignore. The revised Homeowners Association newsletter arrived in every mailbox exactly as scheduled, and for the first time since I had lived there, every listed community amenity matched the official county records without a single exaggeration. My swimming pool was gone from every brochure, every online listing, every welcome packet, and every promotional photograph. In its place appeared only the facilities the association actually owned and maintained. It was a small correction on paper, yet it represented something much larger than updated marketing materials. It represented respect for boundaries that had always existed, even when people forgot to acknowledge them. A few days later, the vacation rental management representative called to let me know that every active reservation had received the corrected information, and every future listing would require documented ownership verification before publication. He thanked me once again for remaining patient throughout the entire situation. I appreciated the gesture because patience had accomplished far more than frustration ever could have. On Saturday morning, I walked into my backyard carrying a cup of fresh coffee while sunlight reflected gently across the calm surface of the pool. The familiar scent of cut grass drifted through the air as sprinklers quietly watered the landscaping beyond the cedar fence. Everything looked exactly the way it had before the misunderstanding, yet somehow it felt different. The backyard no longer represented a problem that needed solving. It had become a reminder that preparation quietly protects the things we value most. I opened the administrator application on my phone almost out of habit. The access history displayed only the entries I expected to see. Every temporary guest code issued to family members during previous gatherings had expired automatically. The permanent administrator account remained unchanged, still the only one authorized to control the electronic gate. The familiar screen no longer served as evidence for anyone else. It simply confirmed that the system continued doing exactly what it had been designed to do. Later that afternoon, one of my neighbors stopped while walking his dog and smiled toward the backyard. He mentioned that several residents had started organizing their own property files after hearing how quickly clear documentation resolved the misunderstanding. Another neighbor said she had finally requested an updated survey for her own home, because she realized how valuable accurate records could become years later. Those conversations made me realize the story had quietly extended beyond my property. It had encouraged people to rely on facts before assumptions. Even Linda changed the way she approached future association discussions. During the next neighborhood committee meeting, she routinely asked whether proposed decisions involved private property before moving forward. Whenever questions arose, county records became the first reference instead of the last. Watching that simple habit develop reminded me that real progress often appears through ordinary moments rather than dramatic announcements. That evening, I generated 2 temporary guest codes for my brother and his family, who planned to visit the following weekend. Each code displayed its activation time and automatic expiration exactly as intended. I smiled while saving the changes because the electronic gate had quietly become the symbol of the entire experience. It had never been about keeping good people out. It had always been about making sure the right people came through the right way. As the last rays of sunlight reflected across the water and the gate clicked securely into place for another peaceful evening, I realized that the strongest foundations are rarely built from concrete alone. They are built from preparation, honesty, documentation, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing the truth never needs to compete with assumptions. Several weeks later, the rhythm of the neighborhood felt completely normal again, and that was probably the greatest sign that everything had finally been put back where it belonged. On a warm Saturday afternoon, I unlocked the electronic gate with the same permanent administrator code that had always existed since the day I installed the system. The familiar confirmation tone sounded softly before the gate opened exactly as designed. My brother and his family were the first to arrive, followed by a few close friends carrying homemade desserts, folding chairs, and enough laughter to fill the backyard long before anyone stepped into the pool. Every guest entered using temporary access codes that automatically expired at the end of the evening, just as they always had. Watching those entries appear in the activity log gave me a quiet sense of satisfaction, not because I expected another disagreement, but because the system continued doing its job without needing anyone to notice. The smell of charcoal drifted from the grill while children played safely in the shallow end and adults relaxed beneath the cedar pergola discussing work, family vacations, and football season. Looking across the backyard, it was almost difficult to believe how much unnecessary confusion had surrounded such a peaceful place only a few weeks earlier. The vacation rental company kept its promise. Every listing remained accurate, every brochure reflected verified ownership records, and the representative occasionally sent brief updates confirming that the new verification policy had already prevented similar mistakes in other neighborhoods. The Homeowners Association also honored its commitment. Community publications now referenced official county records before describing amenities, and questions involving private property were discussed carefully instead of casually. Even Linda changed in ways I had not expected. We were never close friends, but whenever our paths crossed during neighborhood meetings or weekend walks, our conversations remained respectful and straightforward. She no longer relied on assumptions when making decisions, and I genuinely believe the experience had made the association stronger rather than weaker. One evening, as the sun slowly disappeared behind the trees, I stood beside the wrought iron gate for a moment before locking it for the night. The keypad glowed softly in the fading light, and the familiar metallic click echoed across the quiet backyard as the latch fully engaged. I smiled because that ordinary sound carried far more meaning than it ever had before. It reminded me that ownership is not established by confidence, popularity, or loud opinions. It is established by lawful records, careful preparation, and the willingness to let facts speak for themselves. I glanced toward the gray document case resting on the patio table beside an empty coffee mug. Inside were the deed, the certified survey, renovation, permits, inspection reports, warranties, photographs, and every document that had quietly protected my home long before anyone questioned it. Those papers had never existed to win an argument. They existed to preserve the truth. As the pool reflected the last colors of the evening sky and gentle ripples moved across the water, I realized the greatest victory had never been proving someone wrong. It had been protecting good neighbors from misinformation, helping an entire community improve its procedures, and showing that patience will always outlast assumptions when supported by evidence. The backyard looked exactly as it had the day before everything began, yet I appreciated it differently now. Every flower along the fence, every stone around the pool, every light beneath the pergola, and every quiet click of the electronic gate reminded me that real peace does not come from never facing conflict. It comes from knowing that integrity, preparation, and the truth remain standing long after misunderstanding has quietly disappeared.